So, Lucas, thanks so much for coming on and chatting a little bit um, about the Ashes to Ashes tournament, which I think just today, at time of recording, was announced as maybe not the end of Ashes and Startup, but it was intended to be
Yeah.
the end of Ashes and Startup. Um, and I wanted to look at two replays you had playing against Near Earth Hub in the Swiss cut. But let's start with your list. Though I realized before I get to that, I should ask some basic questions like, how long have you been playing?
Uh, Basically since December, I got
Okay,
Gateway at PAX Unplugged.
that's
I had played once or twice, like with the original core set years ago, um, just with like with a friend, and we tried to learn from the rules, and I don't think it went very well. Um, I think we were kept getting lots of rules wrong. Like I think we were either giving the runner mandatory draw or not giving the corp mandatory draw, and things just did not go well.
yeah.
So yeah, and then I kind of knew about Nisei, and then when I was at PAX this year, PAX Unplugged, and they were there, and I decided to buy a set, and then eventually bought into all of Startup and started playing online.
Cool. Well, I guess this is a I I want to say like it's a slightly spicy Hoshiko list. So how did you end up with this list as it is? Um,
Um, so I'd started playing Hoshiko, I don't know, a while ago, or back in probably like January or February at some point when I saw some interesting Hoshiko lists kind of in the startup leagues on GLC, and I saw some that were like using simul chip to like aggressively either botulus or chisel, and I started playing with it. And then later I had kind of liked an as list with Q loop and doing a lot of interesting things with boomerang, and I decided to try and throw Q loop into Hoshiko since I kind of had a list there. So I kind of changed my list around to fit a Q loop to see how that went. And at first it wasn't so great, but I started messing with it a bit more, and it started to feel a little bit better and better. Um, well, some of it was just learning to play it a bit better, like
mhm.
uh, boomeranging myself out of a Q loop. I did a lot at the beginning, or kind of things of that nature.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now it's a little bit unfortunate because I like you do I think one cool trick in these replays that I literally never thought about, um, but this is not a list where all these glacier tools matter that much. It's really going to be about your economy. Have you played against a lot of NEH before this matchup or before this match?
Uh yeah, not so much trap NEH. I've played
Mm-hmm.
more kind of standard or fast advance NEH. I think actually my second or third round in Swiss was against a fast advance NEH. Um, but yeah, the I think you were about to mention like the trick with the buffer drive and Q loop, and
Yeah.
I I had ran into that kind of. I was playing Hoshiko at some point with Chisel and Q loop, and I was trying to, I don't know, I ran a server and I was only able to chisel one piece of ice, and there were two pieces of ice, and I realized like with Q loop, like I could randomly have a devil charm on top of my deck sometimes and it would work out. But
Mm-hmm.
that's a once in a blue moon. So I think I actually poked around asking the startup channel and server. I was like, hey, is there any way to put a specific thing on top of my stack to work with Q loop? And the only thing that came up was buffer drive. Um,
That's a very fun little interaction though. And then if you're worried about PE being in the meta at all, it's a very nice little piece to have as well.
Yeah, and similarly with trap decks, I don't have a ton of experience with trap decks, and it's helpful when it works out.
Yeah. So what was your game plan against this sort of list? And actually,
So uh, So originally, I was thinking I would try to win on centrals and just not deal with their kind of traps, because my more experience is kind of with PE, either kind of just grinder PE or prana PE, and
Hmm.
both of those kind of, at least I could be wrong about this, but it feels like they feed into you running against them more. Um,
Yeah,
Especially
I
prana,
think
if
that's
you
generally
run a
right.
bunch and they charge up their prana before you can actually get into that server, um, you're kind of hosed. And they're often running smaller agendas, so if they score 1 point off the table, it's not a not a huge deal. They're normally kind of just trying to get the damage. Um, so that was kind of my original thought, and then I could hopefully find the Stargate and just start hammering R&D. Um, as far as their ice, they didn't have anything I couldn't just blindly chisel, so I was just
Yeah,
planning to throw a chisel on it, and if it was a, let's see, what were the three pieces? If it was a white space, it would just immediately die. If it
yeah,
was a toll booth, I'd hopefully have a Devil Charm installed and kill it. And a gold farmer, I could either Devil Charm it or I could just bounce off it once. Or if I
yeah,
had my ice carver on, it would also just instantly die.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's like I think that's a nice way to think about the match. And I guess the other thing I would think about is like, okay, how do they actually go and win the game? And like there's against a trap deck, there's like the one way is, oh, I hit all their traps and I get flatlined through some combination. And the main way they're going to do damage to you is Ronin off of turn and then Snare and Urtica Cipher. So it's like, oh, if they have a 4 advanced Urtica Cipher and a 4, like, because they have multiple 4 advanced cards on the board, it becomes pretty tricky to figure out what your out is. If you can't stay above 4 cards at the end of your turn, or 3 cards at the end of your turn.
Yeah.
The big thing when I was looking at this Near Earth Hub list, though, is I can probably run any 2 advanced card as long as I start my. So, like, the thing for me, I was like, I always want to end my turn with or start my turn rather with 4 cards in hand. And if I can end my turn on 3, I'm never going to die. And so I can actually just check most of the remotes they spam down and probably make it out okay. Um, and then when I can, if they haven't put down a bunch of stuff, then I can start poking HQ. Um, and then if you get to the Stargate, obviously that's a great tool to win. But I think you only have it as a 1x, so it's not going to be the
Yeah.
main plan that we can go into the game with. So, let's see. I'm just going to start speeding through the game. So we
Okay.
see a turn like this. And I guess like the to me, I almost want to start running immediately. Um,
Yeah.
so I guess like is what I'm like, oh, I could do a single poke on HQ here, and if I do hit a snare, what actually bad happens? What bad thing happens to me? Um, I'm not sure what it would be. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair. And
yeah,
and maybe it's like you said, check server 2 first,
yeah,
and then if you're damaged, draw up before you check HQ, or if you don't have enough time to draw up to handle the snare,
yeah.
you just
And, yeah. I think the other thing that you could also make a case for is like, oh, you could install this fermenter so that you can get so that later in the game you can get lots of money for a single click and a single card, because against a trap deck with this little ice, most of our cards, most of the cards are just going to be there for kind of hit points. Um, and we don't need to work, having a solid econ is going to be much more important than anything we can do. And in this case, your opponent gets quite, kind of calls or like bluffs out and gets a 3-2. And this is actually the thing I didn't say is the other way that these sort of trap decks win, which is they just sneak agendas by on you. I think something to note is that it is if you can steal 2 of their 3-2s, so a Tomorrow's Headline or 2 of their Beals, they have a really tough time actually getting to 7 points without having to install an advance of Bologna. Um, right? It's like, okay, well, that their other out then is scoring all three superconducting hubs. So like if we can find two of the three twos, we're in a really nice spot.
Yeah, and I think as soon as they just kind of took a 3-2 off the board, and it was just they were that far ahead versus just a 3-1, which is kind of what I'd seen more with trap decks. That's kind of when I first was like, oh, I really need to make sure they can't just do that.
Yeah. And like this is a minor thing, but like in this sort of matchup, I usually don't install my simul chips, even though they're a really nice card. They're often there's especially in this list there's so little ice, and that's the primary tool that we use our simul chips to handle. It's just one of
Yeah.
those things I often kind of think about, be like, do I actually need this? Maybe I don't. Maybe this is more valuable as a card in my hand, so that I can check servers 3 and 4 a little bit more comfortably this turn. Um, But I also think you're actually doing exactly the game plan I talk about. It's just let's keep them honest on the remotes. You don't really care if they have money because the worst they can do is res a, or the worst they can do is like hit you with a little bit of damage, and you're all set. And oh, sorry, if they have a lot of money, the worst they can do is res a Sand, and you can clear that out off the board. So they have to do like Toll Booth and a Sand to make you really stop and care.
Yeah, I think the other thing I was thinking about with the simul chip is they did have I don't remember how many Sands, if that was their only fast advance. I think they might have also had a Vladis Brisk.
They do. You're right. Yeah. So
Um,
do you have imps in your runner list? That might have been a
I don't
thing.
have imps, but I have a clot, so I was
Ah, okay.
possibly getting ready for a clot. I don't remember
Well,
if I was
yeah.
thinking that, but
I
it
mean
may have been.
that is a good reason for sure. Um, yeah. Here you trash the Sand, play the sure gamble. Like I actually think you're playing this matchup fantastically. The thing I would maybe look to do like I don't even think you've missed that many like there's like one or two times you could think like it's like oh maybe instead of installing the simul chip we could have run HQ here. Um, you can see their hand, but the recording can't. So I'm
Oh,
gonna just because I have it set up to do as a layer in OBS, but it's just like one of those things where like actually you know what let's reveal it for just a sec. I'm gonna reveal it to the thing. So like instead of installing the simul chip here, right? We can where was this? Here we could make a run on HQ, and it's like oh when I actually go and look this play, let's say they fire the snare here, right? Um, we're probably actually coming out ahead on that snare play because
oh yeah,
none of these cards matter that much to us, and they go down to a single credit. So then a lot of their long term threats don't matter as much either. Like they're not going to res a Sand City Grid on $2 after their tiered subscription stuff. But there's actually a lot of points hanging out in HQ. So this is like when you have the option, it's nice to get, especially actually this dirty laundry run is like an example where it's like, oh, if we dirty laundry to HQ, it's actually probably a little bit better for us than dirty laundering R&D. And this is like a general thing that I think it took me a very long time to learn is that if you have the choice between the two servers, HQ is generally better because to some extent, if you're stealing or trashing, you're taking away a resource from the corp. When you steal or trash the top of R&D, you're not they're going to just draw a different card instead. So you're not really setting them back much, even when you steal an agenda.
yeah. I think I was gonna say I think I started doing R&D more because I had played some games where sometimes I was just like poking HQ because it was left open and it was like, did I see the same card? Did I not see the same card? And kind of with
Mm-hmm.
R&D, it kind of felt like I know when I'm going to see a new card, and if you can get R&D lock, it kind of helps you. Kind of once I learned that was nice, but it definitely makes sense. Kind of early on, all the cards in HQ are new anyway, so you may as well see them. It's only once you've seen a bunch that it makes sense to make sure you see a new card.
Yeah, and I do think like there is a point against these trap lists, against these sort of trap deck lists, where locking R&D is a super valuable part of the game plan. Usually, actually against NEH, it's probably one of the worst corps to do it because they have a very tempo
Sure.
forward ID ability, so they will very rarely get fully R&D locked. until you get a Stargate down. Um,
Yeah, that makes sense.
but you're doing all the right stuff. Like, yeah, it would have been nice to have had this fermenter ticking for more and more turns than it is, but I think you're actually doing just fine. Um, and just leaving money. And like one thing you can also think about is like, hey, you know what? I don't actually have enough credits to steal a Bologna here. Maybe I just let them have this, or you can pop the fermenter and then go for it. Because if this is a Sansan, or I'm sorry, actually, no, it's not a flat. So it's either a Bologna or a trap, I guess, right?
Yeah, I think what I was thinking here is it was first click of the turn, and
Mm-hmm.
if I ran, I wanted to run early and have time to draw up if it was a trap, and if it wasn't a trap, I could pop the fermenter, and if it wasn't a blown, I can just leave it ticking to get a bit more money.
I think that's a great way to think about it. And yeah, it's an Urtica cipher. Doesn't really set you back. And yeah, you can just draw back up, and you're all fine. Um, you can probably actually put this daily cast down because, like,
Mm.
you can actually look and say, oh, they actually don't have a way to kill me without having a Ronin already on the board here, so I could take some extra money, kind of thing. Um, but it's not. I don't think drawing here is terrible by any means. Um, and then we see a lot more ice come down. And now you're just, I think, doing the right thing here of saying, you know what, I can't really contest the board. Let's just build back up. Let's get our money going. And yet, unfortunately, your corp, I think, or your opponent did a really nice job of reading your tempo and kind of going for a nice little score. But you do have your Stargate now. There's some clock conversation. This this is actually one of the things that I'm like very that made me cringe a little bit. I'll be honest. Which is you have this you pay 4 credits in the click to put down this Stargate, and then don't click the Stargate. Um,
Yeah,
RNG's right there.
I think the one thing I wanted to do is I wanted to get the Stargate down, and I wanted to check the servers, and I think they had installed a snare blank before in earlier in the match. I don't remember, but I think I
Yeah.
was slightly worried that there was a snare there, and I was going to hit the snare and lose my only Stargate.
I think
Um,
I think I do think thinking about that is it's a very reasonable way to think about it. I think the way I might look at this is, let's say this is a Beal, or like what's the absolute worst case for us is that one of these is a Beal, right? Or maybe a Sansan City Grid, which is kind of the same thing as a Beal. It can't actually win in the game this turn, so we get at least 2 more turns here. And so that tells me that I probably want to be looking at my Stargate potentially as more value, because we just spent all this money on it. So I would think about like, oh, I could install the Stargate, install this Chisel, and run R&D, Stargate R&D, right?
yeah,
And it's going to be a little bit better than hitting the snare, which is
yeah,
what you hit right there. Yeah. All right, so they advance a card 3 times. Um, and this is like a real threat, right? This could be
yeah.
the winning Bologna. This could be an Urtica Cipher, and it's really hard to tell. Um,
And I think there's one Urtica cipher. I know there at one point there's an Urtica cipher in archives. Is there one there
there's one
now?
in, you would access one
Good.
in server 10 earlier, and
Yeah,
this list is on 3, so it's 2 down. Um,
yeah. And I think it was basically it's either a Beal. If it's a Beal, I lose. If it's an Urtica cipher and I run it, I lose. So I took the
yeah.
shot of.
Sometimes when I'm in that situation where I'm like, the only way that like if this turns out to be the Ronin, I'm like, you know what? If it's a Beal, I lose. If it's an Urtica Cipher and I run it, I lose. Maybe I'm just gonna Stargate and see if that gives me information.
Yeah, that's
Because like
fair.
you could
Stargate
Stargate
first,
here.
and then
Yeah, and then now that said, if you Stargate first, you actually you don't have enough clicks to draw up and survive a Urtica, regardless of what you do this turn, basically, right? Because this is
Yeah.
5, so um, yeah, it's sort of picking. But like this is like what people who love Yomi shell games are like. Oh, it's so fun where you just have to have this moment of deciding what to do, and it's not my favorite part of Netrunner, but I know some people really enjoy it. Did you? Oh, you gachaponned to then get this down. Very nice. And then, yep, trashing the ice, and now checking the remotes. Like, I think you're playing this very well. What did we miss? Bologna. Very nice. Snare does stink to lose or to hit. I would let's see. I guess there's 2 spin doctors gone. So yeah, I was like, sometimes you might run archives there to just steal the Bologna or pull out the spin doctor if they have one down.
Yeah, and I get unlucky, and he does pull this. So, sorry, I don't know if they can't see the hand.
Yeah, it is right there. But like, hey, it's not the end of the world. Yeah, but I think actually you play this just like very cleanly. Just like, you know what, Stargate's my win condition. You only have 3 credits, so gotta be somewhat conscious about it. But still can check remotes, and they still don't, they still can't win without using advanced cards on the board. So you've got plenty of time. And actually, I think at this point, yeah, there's like 2 snares in the bin, so you're starting to become really safe to just check everything. Yeah, there's definitely a thing like with 7 cards in R&D and only 6 agenda points out. It's like, oh, and none in archives. It's probably worth checking HQ a little bit, especially as they're building a scoring remote.
Yeah, definitely. They should have realized they hadn't scored anything in a while. Even if I didn't look at cards, they just hadn't scored anything in a while, and they were drawing a ton because of Nero Tub. And
Yeah.
just
That said, I don't think you actually lose by taking the line you're taking most of the time, because you really can just kind of grind them out of everything. This is the area where it gets dicey, because now if they can sneak a sand by you or something, you're in for some real trouble.
yeah.
But
They scored that. Yeah, they must have scored it from 18.
yeah, they did score that. That Too Good to Be, or tomorrow's headline, excuse me. Too Good to Be True was the 3-1 that had the same. Or actually, I don't think it was even that good. It was even this good, I should say. All right. Excuse me.
Bless you.
All right. Oh, yes. And here's the fun prognostic Q-Loop chisel interaction that I think is worth calling out just for how cool it is.
Yeah. The fun thing is it works with Devil's Charm as well, so you can do 2 Devil's Charm in a single run.
Oh, wait, what?
Because if I have a Devil Charm installed, a buffer drive installed, and a Charm in my heap, I can use the chisel.
Do you have a paid ability during when you encounter?
Oh, it's after. Sorry, what? It's on approach, because they res on approach, and then you can.
Yeah, I think it's Devil Charm says whenever you encounter a piece of ice. I think when
yeah. Sorry, not 2 Devil Charm a single piece of ice, but 2 pieces of ice in a single run.
Yes, you can Devil Charm 2 different ice in a single run with this interaction. Yeah. All right, and you get the Beal. You see the Urtica cipher, but it does not really matter. Only 3 credits is a bit that it's like the, oh, we can't steal a Bologna right now. But I mean, you just do exactly the right play here, saying, well, it's either a Bologna or it's a. Actually, there's basically
Oh, I
nothing
think
it can be,
it.
right?
Yeah, you can see all the. I've seen. There's one Urtica in the bin. There's Ronin in the bin, and I've seen two Urticas on the table.
Yeah. So, so this can, and the Vlad's also in the trash. So you just know exactly what this
Oh yeah,
is.
I did
So
forget about the Vlad. I think.
yeah. So I think like I wanted to more or less pull this replay because I think you did a like by and large a really good job, and this is an archetype that a lot of people struggle with. Um, I know that because this was the best of three, the second match didn't go quite as
Yeah.
well. um, to some extent, that was like a bit of a rough pull. I'm trying to think if I click X to that replay and if
Well,
there's I actually it's been a little bit since I've looked at that. I'm not sure if it's actually that helpful to
uh,
analyze, but
I would say though the one thing I kind of so when I came out of well I don't know how much when I came out of the third game, so the tiebreaker that I lost is Hoshiko against NEH. Um, I came away from it originally thinking I lost because I was going after everything as opposed to just focusing on centrals because that's kind of how it felt like I lost.
mm-hmm.
Um, but after like so I had watched kind of your quick recap of these on stream and
Yeah.
your explanation of how you went over this, and I kind of thought back to that one and I realized, oh, if I had actually checked everything as opposed to checking a couple things, then I wouldn't have lost. I wouldn't because I would have
Yeah.
checked the Ronin before there was an Urtica.
Yeah. And like this is one of those things where it's and like you did the same play last game, so I'm not surprised. Like, but it's like, oh yeah, the story launcher is actually a little more valuable on HQ here. Once again, kind of thing.
Yep.
But doesn't particularly matter. Let's see. Yeah, and actually, having Dream It Out is super nice for this sort of matchup because you can just kind
Mm-hmm.
of check and get forward tempo. So yeah, like this is a turn where I'm like, maybe you could just go and run, and I'm like it's always scary to be like, do I actually need this cleaver, or can Chisel get us through the gold farmers well enough? And I don't know the answer to that, but I'm like maybe with a buffer drive and the simul chips and stuff, we can say, you know
Yeah.
what, let's make them actually force me to need this before I go and install it.
Yeah, that's
Um,
fair.
and yeah, do you just? It's not quite here, is it? No, it's.
No, because that's the Ronin that's down, I think.
I think so. Yeah, I could just look.
Yeah, because they had a
This
Ronin. Yeah.
yeah. Paste. And then yeah, I actually like this clot install. It does suck that it does get your fermenter. I didn't like it on the first pass just because of that purge, but like the other line is probably like install to light the fire and just blow this up for 2 clicks and $1.
Mm.
Because it's not
Yeah,
like
I guess.
it's still pretty. It's much still cheaper than 5 credits. So
Yeah, I think I was probably hesitant to take brain damage in a trap matchup, but I'm still
yeah.
probably only ever going to take 4 damage, so probably really doesn't matter.
Yeah, with as long because you'll probably be drawing at the end of every one of your turns. That also helps a little, or like you really will still have sort of a 5 card hand size from your
Mhm.
ID ability most of the time. It's probably on net fine. Um, oh yeah, this is
Oh,
just
I check it
unfortunate.
last. Oh, I take credits and check it last click
Yeah,
because I. Oh yeah.
yeah, and so like my big critique, my big comment, I think when I was looking at this replay is like, you know what? If this is a Bologna, like it makes your game hard,
But I
but
don't
maybe you
lose.
don't need to check it. I'm not sure. Like especially with like a spin doctor out, I'm like, are they really going to go for the early Bologna store? But like this is one of those things where like this is honestly one of the parts of Netrunner that I'm the weakest at is evaluating like is this a trap? Is this an agenda? Um, so it's a little bit harder for me to know what the right call is here. But
Yeah, I really think the right call would have. I think that the actual error was whatever turn they advanced server 6. As soon as there was a
Yeah.
single, it's because there's only one two advanced thing on the board. Check it at that point. Any turn when there's not two advanced things on the board, because that's the only time you're really in trouble.
Yeah, I think the one thing that makes it tricky here is that your credit totals are a bit low. And
Yeah,
it's like, oh, well, if we hadn't installed this cleaver, right? Then suddenly I'm like, oh, cool, I can trash the Vlad grid. If this is a Vlad grid, I can,
yep,
contest a Sand if that's what ends up on the board. It's like, hey, you it's a very minor thing, and it may have still, like, if I was playing in your shoes, I don't think I probably would have beefed it at some point in this matchup. But um,
yeah. That was kind of my
yeah.
worry going back to this matchup, because I got to choose sides for the tiebreaker, um, and
Okay.
it was I knew my runner deck was better than my corp deck, but also I just had a feeling I was just gonna do something, and since since it was a trap matchup, and I was just gonna beef
Yeah.
it, I guess.
Yeah. So what was it? Just, I guess, quickly, like, yeah, my sense is that runner feels a bit favored in startup. Is that sort of what you feel?
Yeah, I think so. I know there was actually some analysis on the tournament and of the startup leagues today that I think it was like 55-45.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think that's about right. Um,
yeah, it definitely feels that way. And I would and just throughout the tournament, I was that this tiebreak was the first loss I had with Hoshiko, where I was
oh,
2
that's
two with the
rough.
corp.
Yeah, I mean, in that situation, that makes a ton of sense to go with this line. Um, well, congrats on making it so far, and hopefully you get to enjoy some more fully rich startup, or maybe we can get you into standard at some point. So,
Yeah, that's my
uh,
plan. I just bought Flashpoint and Data and Destiny,
oh, cool.
so I'm
Both
probably going to play a little bit of Midnight Sun startup just to learn Sun, and then jump over to try and learn
cool.
the rest.
Well, if you have replays from startup or standard in the future, feel free to send them along. I'd love to chat with them either in this format or just via DMs kind of thing. So, and thanks so much for
Yeah,
your time tonight.
thanks.
All right, have a good night.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Do you want to introduce yourself quickly so that people know who the other voice on the other end is?
Absolutely. Hello, my name is Rowan. I go by Cobrabubbles on the boards, as we used to say. I've been playing Netrunner since 2014, I believe, on and off. I was a big Game of Thrones LCG player while that was still a thing. But Netrunner was my second game for a long time until the game got cancelled in 2018, and then I fell off it a little bit. Our local meta in Norwich in the east of England fell apart a bit after that, although we had a good meta going before that. And then the past year or so, I've basically since Gateway, I've been getting back on board because what Nisei are doing is really exciting and cool. And I've managed to get a few players local to me back into the game, so we've got a regular night going, which has been really fun. And I've been having a lot of fun playing Startup in that time. I think it's a really, really fun format.
Yeah, it's it's something I've been enjoying trying to get a little bit more into. So you brought Precision Design and Hoshiko, which were sort of my default of, oh, these are you know the best decks to run. How did you actually find how did you make a couple of choices about influence and stuff, and how did you actually find them go for you in the tournament?
Yeah, so I sort of back in the day, I always used to be the kind of player who played some off-meta homebrew thing, and obviously that can be really fun, and I do love deck building and messing around with things. But when I was getting back into Netrunner last year, I thought, okay, I've missed a couple of years of metagame. I'm really rusty. I should just play the good decks and relearn how to play Netrunner by playing the good decks. Uh, as you might expect, that means I've played a lot of PD in the past year, both in startup and in standard. Um, and I've just find it really good fun. It's can be a bit obnoxious sometimes, but it's mostly fair, relatively balanced Netrunner that is interactive and has interesting decision points throughout the games. And also it's a rushy kind of strategy, which has always been my favorite thing to do as Corp, is go fast.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was a fairly easy choice for me, and it was just a question of what exactly I put in the list. And then before the tournament started, somebody published, I've just found the list, it's by somebody called Encoder.
Oh yeah.
And there's a list on NetRunnerDB called Fully OP PD. Pun being, of course, that it's fully operational and the deck grants 3 copies.
Yeah.
And card's just really good in PD, like so much so that I've put 1 copy in my standard deck as well. Because 1 cost draw 4 is really good in a rush deck, and it's a beanstalk.
Yeah, so
that's in a pinch.
that's.
So,
I imagine most of the time you're playing it to draw 4, but having the beanstalk as an option there is pretty nice.
yeah, sometimes it's just better green level clearance as well. The card, not the Discord server. Just gain 1, draw 2 essentially is a fine card sometimes.
Yeah.
The only change I made from Encoder's list was I switched from, they were playing Regolith Mining License, and I switched to Tranquility Hungrid, 2 copies instead. I just like that card more as a, I think it works better with how click efficient you're trying to be in PD. Like spending clicks on Regolith is quite slow. What the deck wants to be doing.
Yeah,
you're usually okay for
surprises
money
me
in
a
most
little,
games.
but yeah, I think the Tranquility makes a lot of sense to me. So this was the one corp replay I have, and I thought it was a very interesting game. And I'm just gonna kind of walk through, and you can kind of talk about what you were thinking, and I'll maybe ask some questions at a couple of different points. Let's see.
Sure thing.
So I think here you use it as the green level clearance, which I think makes a lot of sense. And I really like this early force. I've been playing PD, and this has been a line that we're just like, yeah, just make them have an answer turn 1. And you're also saying, oh, it's a magnet, I still get to score out a 4-2 and make money back anyway. And actually, like, this is already the turn where I'm like wondering, so why did your line here I think is draw oh no, sorry, you add the fully op, you install a spin doctor, you play the fully op for as a beanstalk, and then install an ice. So I guess, like, why did you go for this particular line, I guess, is maybe a...
Yeah, so I realized quite quickly that this was the key mistake of the game, I think. On my side is that I should be jamming the sandbox here and just going fast. As I say, PD loves to go fast, you want to be click efficient. I was looking at my hand feeling a little bit vulnerable to HQ pressure. I know my opponent's on legwork because it's important to note that this cut for this tournament is open deck lists.
Yeah.
And they're on legwork and multiple jailbreak as well, right? Just one jailbreak.
Yeah, 1 jailbreak, 1 legwork.
Yeah. But also multiple imps. So HQ pressure is concerning to me. And I'm sort of looking at my hand with agendas in it, and also some cards I'd like to keep, like the Seamless, and thinking I should do something to protect that. So the line I took was get some more cards in my hand to pad it out, and also put some eyes in front of HQ. I do think that comes back to bite me, because as we'll see, I end up being a bit behind the pace as the game goes on.
Yeah.
Also, like, realistically, I'm just not resing that Ansel. If they install an imp on HQ here,
Yeah, you still can't afford
just
to
not
run.
resing that Ansel.
No, yeah,
Right,
that
technically I can afford it, but
yeah, for sure. I think there is always value in putting down an ice and then scaring the runner off of free HQ runs. Like, I think it's, even if you're not planning to res it, the runner doesn't know that this is going to be an ice you don't res.
that might be true in general, but I think in open deck lists specifically, that's less true, because actually my opponent is paying attention. no ice that really punishes them here. Like drafter, there's
Yeah.
nothing particularly good in my archives right now for me to like. I'm not getting lots of value out of a drafter.
Yeah.
Um, and so they can click through.
Yeah, and
They
takes
run
you to
early enough in
0,
the turn.
which means like even if it
Right.
blows up their board, it blows up, yours even worse in many senses. Yeah.
Exactly,
And
and none of
Hagen
my
doesn't
other
do
ice
anything.
matter.
Magnet doesn't do
Yeah.
anything. Yeah, this
Um,
is one of the tricky things I think with PD that like in standard you have gatekeeper to help give you a little bit more low cost like face check threat. Though I think people are starting to realize like you know what, it's a one time thing, and then I get a 0 strength code gate I get to break for the rest of the game. So people are starting to face check that more. But it is one of those things where runners going to be a little bit more aggressive in the early game.
yeah,
I think,
in standard,
yeah,
I'm a big fan of face checking into PD. I think it's
yeah.
usually correct.
And I think this play makes complete sense, especially with the runner only going to be at 3 credits at the start of their turn. Like, yes, there's going to be like 2 virtual credits here and stuff. It's still very hard for them to call it correctly and get the Hagen. I guess you know how many botuluses they're on, which is also a big question for these lists. So there actually are on 3, but it's not.
Yeah, so I guess partly this is me. Like I was just trying with the jam on turn 1. I was trying to sell a magnet,
Mm-hmm.
because that would be the obvious thing to jam behind. Also, like Hagen, yes, they get in once against the Botulus, but it then is proof in the future because it trashes the Botulus. That's the
Yeah, you can.
cookbook.
Yeah,
That's
you can just
exactly
follow up the following turn with like a sandbox and manic arm. It'll be pretty
right.
safe.
So it's actually quite heads up from them to face check that here,
Yeah.
because now they know they don't lose anything, and I still have to spend the credits because getting the sandbox is obviously very good for me.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, as predicted, I don't get to res my Ansel, and then they do come in and take an agenda, which is unfortunate. Seeing
Yep.
the Vacherons early is bad, obviously.
Yep. And yeah, having the Vashon be the first thing stolen, I think, is unfortunate. This is again a turn where I was like, oh, I would love to see install sandbox, install magnet, like take a credit. I think you can't do both in that situation. You can't score and res the magnet, but it's pretty close, all things considered. Like you can at least keep them out for a
Yeah.
turn.
I mean, I would almost be tempted to, looking at it again, to just go sandbox Managarm.
Yeah, the biggest challenge to that is the Manic like they actually are on 15 credits all of a sudden. So I'm like, oh, the Manic
Right.
maybe has a little bit less value than it would normally. But I think, yeah, any of
But
these plays that try and score out immediately seem like a slightly more, like, more compelling. And the other thing is just like, oh, if the Spin Doctor went in a separate remote, that also might have just been so that you could actually do draw and then be like, oh, double seamless. Maybe I want to be a little more aggressive.
yeah, I guess I have 2 thoughts about that, really. One of them is, I don't know what the upgrade is, right? So if
Yeah.
it's Void, which I have 3 of each in my deck, it could just as easily be Void. And then they go Botulus on the Hagen run, lose their Botulus, and get voided. They
Yeah.
don't, like, that's nothing for them. So
Yeah, that's true.
if I go install upgrade, install, thing behind the upgrade, I think there's a good chance that they choose not to run it anyway, unless they just happen to have drawn their barrier breaker, in which case, fair play.
Yeah.
My other thought about this is something you said on your stream last week, which was that I'm using spin doctors that don't really do anything in the early part of this game, which is something I hadn't, not a way I'd thought about spin doctor before, because clicking for 2 cards just feels so good.
Mm-hmm.
But you do want them to do a bit more than what they're doing here, I think. Like something I've realized playing Void decks a lot in the past year that I failed to think about during this game, clearly, is that having a Spin Doctor available, you have a Void active, is really powerful.
Yeah.
Because it refills you for another Void activation with just 1 click, or even without clicks if it's been on the table before. So that's really powerful. And yeah, just using this one to shuffle in the other one is like also not particularly valuable use of the shuffle.
Yeah,
For a lot
I
of
think
reasons,
that's
again, I think jamming the sandbox was the right line here.
yeah, and like it's I mean, this is why I do the replay reviews, because I don't like it's useful to think about like, oh, what is it kind of, what can I take, lessons can I take for future games? And like, I also suspect that this is a line I probably would have ended up taking. In retrospect, when you watch back the whole game, you go, oh, well, ends up probably being the thing that loses the game. So next time I'm in this matchup, I can make some changes to how I play. And yeah, having that spin doctor just out in the remote and telling the runner, oh, you now need to spend a click, and I'll still get that whole value. Or if you ignore it, then yeah, I had that extra threat of a whole extra void trigger for, you know, really low cost. And the Manigarm gets sniped, but that's okay. Oh yeah, this was the other like very small thing to me here, is I guess you have 3 Manigarms though, right? So it's probably not something you care about having more of copies of in your list. But it would have been something I would have definitely thought about, is do I actually care about these cards more than I care about the Folia? But I don't think I don't think it makes a difference particularly. But
I think at this point I'm starting to think I'm going to need to bridge towards a late game here, because I'm kind of poor. I'm going to need to rest some more ice probably to finish this game. Not least because I haven't gone for the scoring line this turn, so I still need to score 2 agendas probably, unless I find the other Vacheron.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of thinking having more money cards in my deck is better, but yeah, I could see the case for the other Manigarm.
Yeah.
Now the imp comes down and makes my life a misery.
Yep.
I was obviously doing a second seamless here is good, because the runner thinks they've done their job by imping the seamless out HQ, and then I get to surprise them.
Yeah. And then getting the Cyberdex Purge on the game
and then
swings and then also gaining 8 credits is a very nice swing for you here.
Right, but if I still had the second seamless and had another click there, it would have been extremely good for me, I think, because I can either
you could
hedge fund and then start resing the Ansel on HQ, or I can jam the Manigarm and kind of fork them at a match point.
Yeah. Yeah, if you can put down the Manigarm, it like really forces them to go and contest that server immediately. Yeah, this is actually one of the... Yeah, I guess the hedge fund's almost certainly right here. It feels... I'm like, could you instead Manigarm fully op and go for the score here, while they still don't have their barrier breaker on the board? But
yeah, I think that would be an okay line. It'd be a bit dicey. You probably can't res the outer ice.
Yeah, I mean, you don't. I think this magnet is basically just there to bluff now. Like it's going to pretend to be a scary piece of ice up until we find our next piece of ice to overwrite it, because it's just like you're not spending 3 credits to make them spend 1, unless sometimes that can be correct, but not in a board state where you're down like 2 to 1 on credits, I think. But.
Yeah, and this is where we'd start to see something I probably could have realized when I was just looking at my opponent's deck list, which is just how good their rig is against my ice.
Yeah.
Fixed breakers plus leech is just extremely good against the ice PD plays and startup.
Yeah.
I think probably this, like something like this version of the Hoshiko is probably the de facto best runner deck for that reason.
Getting some street noises in the background here. Apologies. Okay. And yeah, this is... Now the runner can kind of lock out your servers here. And yeah, that second leech is pretty rough.
Yeah, it's extremely rough. I'm quickly to the point where there are very few outs for me in this game, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and I think your out here is basically getting the Manigarm's Void package, and then holding it for a turn. Either like, yeah, you basically kind of have to hold it for a turn here, and then make it from there. Like just hope they survive and then put stuff in the remote because you can't like you're no like the Hagen is now a 1 credit tax. Even the brand is going to end up having a hard time doing a ton of taxing. Like you have to purge the turn before, and then they don't get a lot of successful runs or something. So it's very tricky. And like this is like, to me, this is one of the challenges I have when playing startup is like the late game feels so runner favored, like just so extremely runner favored, and it's they had this rig on turn 8 or something.
Yeah, I think I mean maybe this is the place for me to do my big picture take on startup as a format. I sort of agree with you. For me, that doesn't matter that much. Like the game's just still mostly interactive and fun.
Yeah,
my void finally shows up here slightly late, and I find myself in a weird spot now where I want to get to a position where I'm putting down the agenda and the upgrades and versing ice at the same time. And my opponent times their legwork very well and just makes it absolutely impossible for me to do that.
Yeah, no, I mean this legwork is not. Yeah, this is what legwork is traditionally for. It's like the remote's starting to get scary enough. Let's sweep the hand before I like lock R&D, or in this case, kind of lock the remote down. Astonishingly, there was like 3 valuable cards in a 5-card hand, and I somehow only hit 1 of them, which is good for you, but kind of drags out the game.
I don't quite agree with that because they imped my seamless launch, which is actually a huge deal.
Oh, that is a good point, because now you have to spend a click advancing. That's a good catch.
Right, so is the other... Can we see archives quickly? How many seamlesses am I down at this stage?
There's 2 seamlesses down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they got one. They got 2 of the one with the first imp, and then one with the second.
Right, and as we'll see, they eventually get the 3rd one as well. Which means that my, optimistic play of upgrade agenda on the same turn is no longer possible because I wouldn't be able to score on the following turn. So it just further reduces my outs. Yeah,
and it's tricky because like you do need to purge, but you also need to be drawing at the same time. Right. And you just can't. There's no Cyberdex Virus Suite or Jeeves in startup, so you can't really break an R&D lock. Without spending click, while also keeping them down on virus tokens.
Yeah, I mean, I am purging almost purely for money here, I have to say, because they have such easy access to archives and R&D that Leech is just going to be infinitely big.
Yep, and there was the imp for the last seamless, as we're just kind of flying through here.
Right, and this is kind of where I get punished for the... amusingly, all of my opponents... companions procced on the same turn this turn.
Yeah.
They had to do some fiddling to figure out what was the best way to do that. It didn't matter at all, but
I was a little surprised
at this point
that you didn't just like void off-world advance it or something. Like I don't think it keeps them out because they have 9 counters, but it does seem like that's sort of the hope, I guess. Though even I think with 2 brands that doesn't do anything, right? Because they spend 3.
I guess I could put my opponent to the test and see if they decide to run it, but like, why wouldn't they at this point?
Yeah. I guess. How many cards would you have? Yeah. You'd only have 5 cards in hand, so you couldn't void them 3 times, which is I think what you'd need to be able to do.
Right. That's the other thing that I'm starting to do is like, I've lost my click efficiency. Almost entirely because I have no spin doctors left. I have no seamless launch.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna continue to just lose things from hand as the game goes on. So I don't really have the ways to assemble the powerful plays that PD is supposed to be able to assemble. And even if I did, I can run them about 3 times probably with no trouble with that many leech counters.
Yeah.
And yeah, they have bravados and things. I know that they're not going to run out of money. So at this point, I concede, I think, justifiably, and exactly because all 3 of my seamlesses are gone.
Yeah,
That's the main reason, because both of us know that only advanced cards are agendas
yeah,
at this point. So it's just so hard for me. Like, I can't drag them into the remote more times than they can have money, because they can just, if I keep installing unadvanced things, they can just stop running. They know
yeah.
that they're gonna lose.
I think there's definitely some argument to be like, oh, it's a tournament, always play your routes, but like, I also agree that like you have so few here that like it's not really a big loss.
Right,
I
and
think
I generally I am that kind of player. I'm a bit of a never concede
yeah,
kind of player. I do also think
yeah. Wait, no, you
specifically the fact that it's sorry.
no, go ahead. Sorry.
Specifically the fact that it's open deck lists, and also that I knew that if I lost this game, I would have to play another game, and it was late at night, and I was a bit tired.
Yeah.
Felt like saving the brain power was the better thing to do.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty reasonable call, and it's like they can check this remote. Bravado means they're going to basically come out with more credits than they went in. I think even if they have to break a second brand here, and then they just like run R&D, see the top, and can like just kind of camp. And yeah, as we were talking about, like even a double brand remote doesn't actually stop them.
Yeah.
It's, I think a pretty reasonable concession, but thanks so much for sitting down and talking with me about the game. You did make it on to the next round. I guess, how did this PD list do for you throughout the whole tournament?
It has lost one other game,
Mm-hmm.
which was against another Hoshiko. And I think just a pretty bad opening draw. Fairly straightforward loss, that one.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's performed well. It does the thing it's supposed to do. I think this was one of my less good games with it, just because I wasn't quite in the headspace to like realize what my game plan was and drill down on going as fast as possible.
Yeah.
Which is what I was supposed to do, as we discussed. I think. Yeah, it's done well. My Hoshiko is undefeated, entertainingly.
Oh, nice. Well, I'm sorry for not showing a replay
Yeah,
of that.
no, not at all. I understand. I do think this was the more interesting game.
Yeah.
Although my first Hoshiko game was quite wild, as if people go and watch your stream VOD from last week, they will be able to see that the way my opponent's draw lines up in that game is very unlikely.
Yeah.
And quite entertaining.
Yeah, that was maybe I'll post the link to that replay in the comments for the video so that people can go and look at that one themselves, because it was a fun game. It was just one where I felt like the court made a couple of mistakes that seemed like they were almost like card reading errors, and it felt weird to have that called out in a replay.
Yeah, that's reasonable. Yeah, but it was an entertaining game anyway.
Oh yeah, it was definitely a very good game. All right, well, thanks so much for your time, and I'm hopefully going to have this up before next weekend, but we will, so it gets out a little bit before spoiler season. But
yeah, okay, thank you. This was fun. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Cheers.